This is the panel on succession planning, passing the torch. First, I want to thank our panelists, Hunter, Michael, and Michelle. They will make brief introductions in a moment, but I will start with an introduction of Protos Capital. We are a lower middle market investment firm focused on buyouts in the lower middle market in North America and Western Europe. We've been around since 2003. With that, I will pass the mic over to Hunter for a brief introduction, then Mike, and then Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So Rockwood Equity is a lower middle market private equity firm that's been around for a little over 20 years. We've got offices in Cleveland, Denver, and New York City, and have 10 employees spread across those 3 locations. As a firm, we invest in, generally speaking, regulated industries, specifically in aerospace and defense, healthcare, and specialized industrials, and typically target companies with $2 to $7 million in EBITDA.
Mike.
Great. Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Connaughton. I'm a partner with Cyprium Partners, and Cyprium has been around since 1998, and since then focused primarily on non-control investing, where we partner directly with owner-operators, entrepreneurs, family-owned businesses, and help them with growth scenarios, acquisitions, for which we provide financing in the form of sub-debt and equity. We also provide dividends to owners, as well as shareholder recaps, which are typical uses of our capital. We have currently 15 investments in 2 funds, 5 in Fund 4 and 10 in Fund 5. We have over 90 transactions that we've completed since 1998. And we focus on businesses that have EBITDA very, very broadly from, call it 5 million up to 50 million.
Thank you, Mike. Michelle?
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Nasir. I'm the Chief Talent Officer at Arsenal Capital Partners. Arsenal is a specialized private equity firm. We have a unique model that is domain and expert rich. We focus on 2 sectors, healthcare and industrials. We're currently on our 5th fund, and we have been in existence for over 20 years. We are growing. We are roughly 60 people today, headquartered primarily in Midtown Manhattan.
Thank you, Michelle. We did have a couple of poll questions. We want to lead that off. I don't see the results yet, but the first poll is, I just see it now. Does your firm have a succession plan? And if the audience can take just a second and answer the question, that would be very helpful. So the results of the poll, does your firm have a succession plan? 66.7% said yes. I'm sorry, 50% said yes, it's changing. And 25% said no, and 25% said thinking about it. So this will probably continue to morph. And we encourage everyone, there will be another poll question in the middle of our panel, but we do encourage everyone, if you do have during the panel any questions, please do put it into the chat. And I will try to select a few questions at the very end to ask the panelists. So please do take that into consideration. So with that, I will kick it off with the first question for the panel, which is, where is your firm in its life cycle? How are you planning for succession? And perhaps I'm going to ask a panelist to lead it, and then the other panelists to comment on top of that. But Hunter, do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Thanks. I'm happy to take a crack at it. So at Rockwood, we're currently investing out of our 3rd fund and in the process of raising our 4th. I'd say generally the employee base is young. However, we're certainly growing, despite having been around for 20 years. As it relates to succession planning, I certainly acknowledge that, I'm one of the more junior folks on the panel here, but, I'd like to start off and just say, I found my experience at Rockwood to be invaluable, in the last 2 to 3 years. I think if you look at our firm's history, we have a really strong track record of growing and developing leaders within the organization. There's a handful of folks, that started at Rockwood early in their careers. They've now been here a dozen, 15 years and are extremely important and integral pieces of the leadership team today. Being, a micro cap firm, we don't have a formal hiring cycle. We don't have kind of a 2 and out, analyst or associate program for more of the junior folks, as you may see in other firms. I think we really value kind of from the onset providing real hands-on experience, responsibility, access directly to management teams and various parts of, the deal process in order to really, provide kind of a post-MBA experience without really having to go to business school for a lot of the younger folks. I think as a firm, we certainly value intellectual curiosity. We value each other's opinions. We encourage each other to express those opinions and value their insights as well. And I think, part of succession planning for us is truly developing that exposure early on, really in order to drive business continuity, as employees cycle in and out. And I think, as you put those pieces together, Doug, that's really kind of a key piece to our succession planning at Rockwood.
Okay, thank you, Hunter. Any other comments on top of that, Mike or Michelle?
Sure. So we're about 70% invested in Fund 5 to answer the cycle question. So Fund 6 is right around the corner. And, the way we think about funds is really like a vintage fund. So certainly at the partner level, we need to represent to our LPs who the team is, the principal team, and who the senior leadership is. And so, partner, so to speak, is kind of embedded at day one at the start of a fund. But the whole firm obviously is part of the team. And I would just pile on to what Hunter said about, developing the team. And, for us, it has been over time. I'd be lying if, certainly 23 years ago, if I had this poll question and I said that we had a succession plan, I'd be lying. But after 23 years, you learn a lot and you evolve. And so today, both, certainly embedded in our LP documents and other, management agreement documents that we have, we certainly have the structure and we have, templates for the technical aspect of succession. But, building a culture and building a culture of communication comes in our experience over time and with that experience. And again, I would echo Hunter in saying that, a big part of that planning for succession is all about keeping those lines of communication open with the entire firm.
I will take a different tact on the question. So I think as you think about succession, it's really thinking about the capabilities you need for the future and then developing, building, or buying those capabilities and ensuring you're embedding them inside of the organization. So we have been very successful in thinking about human capital as a core dimension of our playbook, as you will. And so as I think about succession and how we create leaders for the future, I think about that as a iterative and continuous cycle. And so thinking about the technical capabilities to build on, thinking about new capabilities to add, and also ensuring that you are fostering the values and the behaviors, which is also an important part of succession within the leadership structure and within the organization as a whole. So we are in our 5th fund and planning for our 6th. And so I would say we're getting better at it. It's a rinse and repeat sort of cycle, if you want to think about it that way. And we keep raising the bar each cycle, each fund.
Thank you, Michelle. Let me go to our second question, which is, what are the primary objectives in a succession plan? And this include everything from diversity to LPs and other things. Mike, you want to take a first crack at that?
Sure. So Michelle's points are very well taken on, to me, what resonates there is the personnel side. But if we can take a step back, and at least at Cyprium, we think about our LPs a lot. At the end of the day, we're working for them. They're paying us a management fee to execute a strategy. And in our case, it's been a strategy that's been fairly consistent over 5 funds, which they appreciate. And so we spend a lot of time with our LPs. We certainly spent a lot of time and effort on our annual meeting with them that we just completed a couple weeks ago, virtually for the second year in a row, by the way. We do plan to do that in person next year, which we're looking forward to. That's worth. But we have multiple lines of communication with our LPs within the firm, both at like an IR level, if you will, but also our deal teams are talking to them occasionally, certainly for co-invest opportunities that we show them. So we really see that as an important part of our business. So just as we try to go out and do deals, and once we do a deal, even though we're non-control, we try to bring a lot to the table like a traditional buyer would, or a control buyer would. We try to bring a lot of resources and give advice to our portfolio companies. So too, if you will, the third leg of that stool is our relationship with our LPs, because without them, we don't exist, right? And then if you kind of then start to think institutionally, I think that is a goal of a succession plan, is to preserve that institution, if you will. Sure, we're at the heart of what we all do. We're all individuals, and we're probably all deal people at that. But a firm to survive and have successful succession, in my mind, you have to have an institution, if you will, or an institutionalized approach which transcends individuals and ultimately survives individuals. And, perhaps that's another way of saying, there's a culture at play here too. And so I think, certainly an objective is to, not only execute a strategy for our LPs and, do a good job for them and get them a return, but also perpetuate the firm, its culture. In our case, our view towards diversity, where in our case, we have 2 women out of 6 partners. That aspect has been very important to us over time, and it's becoming more so in the marketplace with respect to ESG in particular. So all these factors play into, in my mind, what it takes to kind of construct and keep your eye on the objectives of a good succession plan.
Thanks, Mike. Hunter, Michelle, any other comments before we go out to our next question?
Yeah, I was going to add just one point to that. I think another outcome of having a succession plan is creating that DNA of development inside of the firm, right? So knowing and going through the practice of creating that plan also puts in the mindset of the leaders that we're developing the next generation. We've had a really nice model where we've had a lot of internal promotions at the firm. So that's, again, another bit of evidence that it's working.
Great. Let me go to my next question. Thank you, Michelle. What are some of the concrete steps you have taken to plan for succession? What went right and wrong? Perhaps, Michelle, could you take the lead on that?
Sure. So, one of the things that we do, and I'm sure Hunter and Michael do something similar, is we have periodic development cycles. So we have twice a year true reviews, right? So both performance and development, and that sets the foundation for our succession planning. So that's a concrete action that we take twice a year. For those folks in leadership positions, so folks who are, say, at mid-level, so who are managing other teammates, folks at the leadership level, we also require them to really think about development, and we have development priorities. I have a customized conversation with each of those leaders outlining the opportunities for them to grow and stretch into that next role. So that becomes, again, part of the DNA of how we are ensuring that each of the leaders are developing individually. At a team level, we also look to see where we are in need of new capabilities, where there might be opportunities, and so forth. So we're also looking at it individually and at a team level, sector by sector. The last thing that I'll say is that we also employ third parties to help us, coaches, learning and development. And so as we're thinking about succession, we're thinking about it not only in the context of what you can do at Arsenal, but where you might also be lifted up or developed or grow in other circumstances. So we use our networks and other things to ensure that those things are happening. So those are some of the concrete steps we take in addition to 360s and others to ensure development in succession.
Thank you, Michelle. Hunter, Mike, anything to add?
Go ahead, Hunter.
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Michelle said. I mean, I think one thing that we certainly encourage at Rockwood, while we have a formal 360 review, is, we absolutely encourage on the fly real-time feedback. We found that that's something, I can speak personally to it, that, helps an individual develop real time. You're not waiting 6 or 12 months to get that feedback, and at which point, it could be stale or could kind of fall on deaf ears. So that real-time feedback has been great for us, but, I'd certainly echo a lot of what you said, Michelle.
I would just add, Doug, again, after not doing some of these things, I'll admit to, and I told you that we're evolving. I can tell you, you will definitely lose people if you don't do these things. And so we unfortunately, we have lost some really good people, perhaps because we weren't as communicative as we could be. And we'd like to think that we have corrected that now.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Kelly, if you can launch the next polling question. If the audience can take a second and just answer this, that would be helpful. We should have made this a multiple selection. Now that I look at it, it's not just one, right? So while we get the polling going here, why don't I go ahead to be efficient here and go to the next question while we're waiting for the results here. How do you translate succession best practices to portcos and vice versa? And this is always a very interesting topic to me because we learn a lot from our management teams at portfolio companies, and they expect us to bring something to the table as well. So be very curious to see how the panel answers this question. But Hunter, you want to take the lead on this? Yeah,
absolutely, Doug. So I'd say generally speaking, the organizations and that we partner with and invest in tend to be really small. A lot of the companies have well less than 100 employees. The vast majority of which are not managers. So generally speaking, kind of the management team, if you will, is pretty small. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the succession plan doesn't really exist. And the need for succession planning, oftentimes arises out of a necessity for operational continuity, more so than from a leadership perspective. We absolutely invest in continuing education and make sure that employees have exposure to all aspects of the business where applicable. Because ultimately our goal is to retain the best people and offer them, opportunities that they might otherwise not have had. So one example comes to mind. We've got, kind of a lead operations guy at one of our companies, and we actually encouraged him to pursue an executive business program at Northwestern. And the company was going to pay for that, and that's an example of developing him personally, and something that we encouraged him to do that he might otherwise not have. So I think generally understanding kind of what each upper level manager or kind of C-level executive is responsible for, and establishing a process to understand what happens in the case of emergency is really important, because ultimately our goal is to establish a clear chain of command in the event that something does happen, really to drive home that kind of resiliency and planning and visibility that comes along with those things. So, I'd say that we've got a handful of tools that we use. We like to build out a strong bench of board members who have the ability to step in, in the case of certain events, and kind of similar to what Michelle noted is, we do use some outside resources. We've got, an organizational health expert that we bring on at the beginning of every new investment, who helps kind of our owner operators think through, their needs, their wants, their desires, as it relates to succession. And, I think oftentimes out of those conversations, people realize that they may value certain things more than others. So that's certainly part of our approach at Rockwood.
Thank you, Hunter. Any comments, Michelle, Mike, that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say we have a human capital network. And so through that forum with our portfolio companies, we highlight and harvest best practices from the portfolio companies, but also through our talent reviews with that audience, we also ensure. So for example, in this last group, we asked and mandated that we see diversity statistics as part of the succession planning for the portfolio company. So it goes both ways. And so we use those forums to help us do that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Doug, is just to highlight some of the relationships that me and my partners have with some of our CEOs. And our companies tend to be on the smaller side as well. And many have not had boards before. We're oftentimes the first institutional capital that they brought on. And when it really works, they have a use for our capital, obviously, but they also are looking for that kind of partnership. And it's really an important part of what I think we all do as investors. And it's really satisfying, actually, when you can have a rapport with a CEO who's never, frankly, in some cases, some of these entrepreneurs, we all know what kind of characters they are. They don't have a lot of friends at the top, and they don't have a lot of people that they can talk to. But all of a sudden, once you put your capital at risk and you become an investor in their company, all of a sudden you have something in common with them, and they actually respect that. And you got to be a little bit careful to not step too far over into the friendship realm, which is really tempting and obviously often happens. But the point is, we're also there as that advisor to challenge them at the board level and to bring these resources that Michelle and Hunter have referenced. But to be able to do that, you have to have that rapport with your management teams.
Yeah, for sure. So I thought we would spend just a few minutes on this polling question, which now that I look at it, it's not really a one choice answer. I think there are probably multiple choices within. But the question is, how do you identify future leaders? And I would say that all of these are fairly important. But if I could just ask the panelists, do you have any sort of pecking order to this list, or all of those elements equally important? How do you guys think about picking future leaders given these criteria? Anybody can start.
I'll start. We're a relatively small firm, right? So we've got, call it like 15 investment professionals, 6 partners. And by the way, the 6 partners have been together for over 20 years. We haven't had a lot of turnover. We've been arguably a deal shop, right? We have our heads down a lot of the times, executing deals if we're not fundraising. Although the wise man once told me, you're always fundraising. So all of that is to say that the management of the firm sometimes gets lost in the day-to-day execution. And so it can be hard to pull someone off a deal who is a pure deal person and all of a sudden ask them to dedicate time. And frankly, it can take a lot of time to build all the things that we've talked about today. And I would argue that's why perhaps bigger firms like an Arsenal can hire Michelle. I would love to have Michelle come work for us, but we probably couldn't keep her busy and don't have the resources. But you get my point. It's tough for deal people sometimes to rise above and be a leader. And so the punchline to me is, amongst that group, you have to have agreement of the dividing and conquering if you want to perpetuate the firm. In other words, if someone raises their hand and volunteers to do a lot of this team building and human resources and investing in the future, that takes real time, and they're not going to be able to do as many deals. There has to be an acceptance of that, and there has to be a priority and value attributed to that to enable that function to have credibility, but also for that function to be able to execute. And at the end of the day, everyone wants the next fund, so it's in everyone's best interest to do this. But you need that buy-in from everybody in the senior management team, I believe, to agree to divide and conquer.
So I think if you don't make time for that, you have a risk of loss of continuity, right, of the organization. I'd maybe just add to your point, it's the partnership ethos, right? So it's that ability of the group to make either time or make it part of the deal transaction conversations, that you're also thinking about how you're passing the torch as you will.
Thank you. Let me go to the next and probably final question. How do you communicate your succession plans and moves? Michelle, do you want to take that? We have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I will give you the 30-second answer, which is very carefully, but maybe the better part of that is we do communicate regularly through newsletters and updates about promotions. We're also thoughtful both internally and externally as we think about our future leaders, right? So highlighting folks who are leading a sector, thinking about ways to broaden their brand externally and internally. But it is something that we do carefully and in a nuanced manner, both through those formal communications, but also internally thinking about things like next generation leaders or future sector heads.
Interesting. So I did have one final question, and then we'll have to give our thanks and goodbyes. But I've heard on this panel a number of times, preserve the DNA culture of the firm, which I agree is absolutely important. What that necessitates to me is bringing up the internal resources, right? Because that is where your culture is going to reside. When is it the right time to bring in an external talent? Perhaps just one person could tackle that, and then we'll give our thanks.
Sure. Out of necessity, I would say. That's, I think, a way to summarize today's call would be to say that all the things that we've talked about, building your organization, communicating with your employees, hopefully you're building layers and you're building continuity and you're building that DNA such that hopefully you never have to go outside. And so if you do go outside, it's a challenge to find that match. It just is. That's why you spend time building what we talked about today.
I want to thank the panelists. I think we're out of time here. I'm getting the nod. So Hunter, Mike, Michelle, great job. Thank you very much, and hope everyone enjoyed the panel. Thanks very much for letting us provide it.
Thanks, Doug. Good job. See you.